Today, on the two-car garage, we start the assembly on this Dune Buggy. So, before I can actually get the beam put back in place, we've got this hole here. It's just an access hole, allows us to put the shifter in, access the fuel line and that. I want to get this covered up just to seal this off from the elements, just so we're not getting any garbage in there. The car did not have one when I got it, so we're just going to fab one up real quick. I just happen to have some scrap stainless steel that I picked up from my steel supplier. It's just this plate is just a little bit too wide. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to cut this to the proper length to fit inside here. We'll mark a couple spots for some holes, get it drilled out, and get this mounted. Once this plate's on, then we can go ahead and start putting the beam in place. So back here at the car, here we've got our completed plate. Holes line up perfectly. We've got our bolts, and things are looking pretty good. So let's get this bolted down. Now, one thing I do like to do, I don't plan on taking this off again for quite some time. So I am just going to throw some blue Loctite on there. On each bolt, just to make sure nothing vibrates loose. I don't want to lose this. Probably not a necessary step for this, but it's worth the extra effort just for the peace of mind. So let's dab this Loctite on here. Put that on each bolt. Get things lined up. And we go ahead and zip these down. That's nice and snug, good to go. Let's grab the beam and get that put in. Okay, so I've got the beam laying on the floor here, ready to go. A couple of things we're going to do when we go to install this. I do want to improve the steering feel a little bit, so we are going to put some shims in to increase the caster just a little bit. But you're also going to see I'm going to put a set of shims up in the top, because one thing that happened when these adjusters were installed, which allow us to drop the front end, there was also a support piece welded in back here that doesn't fit flush to the frame head here. So what we're going to have to do here is take one of these sets of caster shims and place that on the upper tube to space that tube out to clear the support. So what we'll end up doing on the lower tube is installing two sets of caster shims. That will give us the extra caster that we're looking for, as well as spacing the whole unit out far enough to make sure we clear in the center here. So we'll take this, I'm going to lay this out. There are some lock plates here. After the bolts are tightened, we go ahead and bend these tabs over, so I want to make sure I get those installed now. I don't want to forget that. So we'll lay those in place. I am going to use some Loctite on these just as some added security. Also is going to help ensure we don't have any potential rust issues, although I don't see this car being out in weather much. So again, I'm just going to take some of my blue Loctite. I want to make sure I can take this apart again in the future. And I'm just going to coat the threads with that. And then we'll drop this bolt in place. Coat those threads, drop the bolt in place. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise this up, get the top 2 bolts started, kind of get things hanging, then we can worry about getting the other parts installed. Okay, so we got the top 2 started. I'm going to go ahead and throw the bottom 2 in. But one extra thing I'm going to do here, I have these tabs. These are actually there. We're going to put these in right here. And I'm using these to actually hold up the hood of the car. So the hood will actually mount to this here. So I just got to make sure I put those in before the lower bolts, so I don't have to take things back apart later. So again, take these lower bolts here, lock it in there. Both threads here. Before I actually start tightening things up, I do want to install this bracket. This bracket here is what actually supports the hood. And by installing and tightening this now, at least temporarily, that's going to ensure that these 2 little brackets are square. So we'll just take and run a couple of bolts up through here. Just hold this temporarily, and then we can continue on. Just kind of snug that up for the moment. I don't want these fully tight just yet. I want to make sure I get these lower bolts secure. We'll kind of tighten this all up in a sequence here. So now everything's kind of set in place, so we can start installing our shims. So I'll put the upper shims in place here. Just kind of lay those in for the moment. Now we'll take our double stack of lower shims and insert that here. That on the other side. Now one thing I want to make sure is that these shims are actually centered in the tube, both top and bottom. So as I clamp this down, we know that we've got a good secure clamp. So I'm going to take a look and view this from the side here. And then I'm just going to get a small brass punch that we can use to kind of tap things around until everything's even. So let me reposition you over to the side here so you can see what's going on. So you can see, looking from the side here, these are our caster shims Here's the top set, here's the bottom set. And again, I'm just going to take a small brass punch here, something soft so I don't hurt the aluminum. And now I can lightly tap these shims around until I get things lined up right where I want it to be. So I'm just going to repeat that for all 4 shims, then we'll get things snugged up, then we can get things torqued into position. So now that I've got the caster shims installed, I got things all lined up exactly where I want them. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to snug up these 4 bolts. You'll notice here that I can't get a socket on these lower bolts right now because of these brackets. So what we'll do is we'll just get these secure, get them snug so they're holding the brackets in place. Then I can remove these bolts holding this piece on there, and then we can torque things down. So we'll just get this all temporarily snugged up here. So now that everything's snugged up, we're going to go ahead and remove these guys here. And with those fasteners out of the way, now we can go ahead and torque this down. I've already looked it up, and we need this to be 36 foot-pounds. So we'll set our torque wrench to 36. And now we can tighten this up. Alright, so with everything tightened up here, I went and grabbed a screwdriver, because all we have to do now is take this little tab here, and we want to bend this over to grab the head of this bolt, just like so. So we'll do that with this side. Again, with this side here. All these plates here do is help ensure that the bolts aren't going to back off on us. You know, with all the vibration that's going to happen, there's potential for things to vibrate loose. This is just added security. That, you add the Loctite to it, I don't think we're going to have any problems. So now I'm just going to go around and hit all of these other bolts, and then we can start assembling the rest of the suspension. Final step here, now that I've got everything tight, as I was bending over the lock plates and with installing the new bolts and everything, I did manage to scuff up all my paint. Not too concerned. I did just paint this with a rattle can spray paint, just to make touch-ups easier. So I'm just going to take and quickly touch up these areas. Just to protect from any rust, even though you're not going to be able to see any of this once the car's put together. At least it looks a little nicer. So let's grab some other parts here and let's start putting it together. So the next thing we want to do here, now that we've got everything bolted down tight, is we want to insert the torsion springs into the beam here. The way this works I grab one of the packs here. There's just a bunch of individual leaves on this pack. Once this is inserted into the beam, there's a bolt that's going to hold it in the center here. And essentially what will happen then is you've got 2 leaf packs. Because they're bolted solid in the center, you end up with basically 4 individual torsion springs. Before installing this, we do want to coat these in grease, because as they're twisting, they'll be sliding against each other. We just don't want any premature wear. Even though I took this apart years ago, I have had this labeled, so I know which side goes where. This is the upper leaf pack, and this is the right hand side, so that's actually going to go, it's going to go in just like this. So let's get this greased up here, and then I'll show you a little trick for getting it inserted, because it's kind of difficult to nail this center support. So for greasing this up, I'm going to use the same grease that I'll be using to grease all the bushings, so we don't have any compatibility issues there. For this, I'm going to be using a red line grease. Should be nice and compatible with the polyurethane bushings that we'll be using, as well as, you know, I like to use the highest quality product I can find. So for starters here, I'm just going to clip off this piece. I'll get rid of my tape on this end. I just want to make sure that as I'm going through this individual stuff, I'm not losing the orientation. The spring was initially installed this way, and because it is a spring, it tends to take a set position. So I want to make sure everything remains exactly the same. So as I grease these up, I'm going to set them down in the same order, so we don't have any issues there. So simple enough. I'm just going to pile a bunch of grease in the palm here. We'll start with that, and we'll just grab a spring and drag it through. And then that'll set just like that. Grab the next one here. And now we're just going to repeat that for all of them. Okay, so with the spring all greased up here, just to make things a little easier to catch the inside support here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a zip tie, and we will stick that on here. All we have to do is snug this up a little bit. We'll cut that off, even things out, and now we're ready to actually insert this in the tube. So what we'll do here is just bring that in the end of the tube here, find the center, go. Now with that inserted, I'm just going to leave the zip tie in there. It's not going to hurt anything. And I can just bring this up, and I can see my little center divot here for the spring. And all we have to do now is even up the ends, but we'll do that as we install the rest of the parts here. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the other torsion spring. We'll get that inserted into the lower end here, and then we'll continue with some control arms. All right, so at this end of the tube here, what we've got is we've got these trailing arms and these bushings. So what'll happen is the bushing will slide into the tube, the trailing arm slides into the bushing. One problem I have found, I have a set of bushings here. This is actually the set of bushings that is supposed to fit this beam. There's a little step here in the end. But in my initial test fitting, I found that when I put this bushing in, it is really loose. Once it's inserted, and once I have the control arm in there, nothing fits right. And I really wanted to make sure I have everything as tight as possible. So what we ended up doing here is I found another set of bushings that does not have the step in the end, and I ended up machining my own sleeves that are going to actually make sure everything fits tight. So we'll grab, this is the upper left one, because I have each one is individually marked. So these two go together. So what we'll do is we'll take this sleeve, that slides on here, and then my bushing will slide in here, and then this will have a nice tight press fit. Something else that we've done here, originally these were just plain solid bushings here, but I want to be able to grease this in the future in case we ever have any squeaks develop. So what I did is I lined things up with the grease zerk holes in the beam, drilled and threaded this. So now once this is inserted, the grease zerk will actually thread into this, which will do two things for us. One, it'll hopefully keep this from rotating with the suspension, and two, it will allow me to actually pump grease into the beam to re-grease these fittings. So now we can just go ahead and get things installed. I am going to squirt some grease onto the outside of the bushing here. That's just to help prevent any rust from occurring on the beam itself. And then we'll just get things all slid into place. Now with our bushings installed here, I can go ahead and insert my grease zerks. And there we go. There's our bushings installed. Now it's time to get the control arms put in. Alright, so with the control arms here, upon disassembly I did actually mark them so I know which one's left and right, just to make sure that everything goes back to where it originally lived. We'll start here just with the lower control arm. Again, I want to make sure things are well greased. So we're just going to take and Smear a bunch of grease on here, and then we'll pump some more grease in once everything's assembled. But now we just got to make sure we get the springs lined up here. This will index on the little square in the end here. And again, just for the moment, we're just going to snug this down. So now with it just snug, it's going to draw the control arm over, or the trailing arm over to where it's supposed to be. And we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it like this until we get the other side assembled, and then we'll go through and torque everything at that time. So let's get the upper arm put in here. And there we have it. Control arms are installed. Now we'll just move over to the other side, get those installed, and then we'll get things torqued down. So with the beam installed, with the springs installed, with the torsion arms installed, last thing I want to do now is just go ahead and get things finished up. Now that I've got both of the trailing arms installed, I noticed that this one over here is a little stiff. This one over here is a little easier to move. So just to help center up this, I'm just going to give this trailing arm here a tap to help center up this bushing. And now this arm's moving good, and this arm moves good. The lowers were fine. I'm not worried about those. So that tells me that my center support is lined up. So now we can go ahead and get it tightened down. Torque spec on this is 36 foot-pounds, same as the beam mounting. So now I can go ahead and tighten this up. So that's the first one. There's that one. And now we've got these plates that go on here. And those are actually going to keep this from moving around. So we'll go ahead and get our nuts installed here. I'll get this one torqued. Get that one torqued. And then we've got a couple of jam nuts here. And that's that. Now, I haven't put any never sees or anything on here yet. I will do that later. Right now, I'm just going to leave this set. I've got it dropped just a little bit, but once we get the car finished and we get weight on it, then we'll fine tune the actual height of this. So for now, this end is good to go. And now we can move on and torque the trailing arm. Okay, so now with everything tightened down, we can go ahead and get the steering knuckle installed. Before I did that, I went ahead and I got the bump stops installed on either side here, just to get that out of the way. Figured it was easier to do before we had the knuckle on. But the way this works here, this is a kingpin style suspension. So the spindle actually rotates on the knuckle here. This has been all rebuilt. All the bushings are replaced, and then the link pins will slide into here, and then they mount in the control arms like so. In order for this to operate correctly and be adjusted properly, we actually will use shims to space this out properly, top and bottom. To figure out what shims you need to use and how much, all you have to do is measure the offset between the upper and lower. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to lay a straight edge across the bottom one, and I'm just going to measure the space here between the face of this trailing arm and the straight edge, and this comes out to, that said 6.5. I'm going to measure it a couple of times. Here, a little more accurate, that says 7. If I measure to this face here, again, that says it's 7. And just to double check, I'm going to go up a little bit higher here. And here I am at just a tad over 7. So after measuring in a couple places, I'm going to say that that's a 7mm offset. What that does for us is, if I go to the book, there's a chart here. Chart looks like this. And all I have to do is find my shim pack. Now this, we're going to set this up for 8 shims because we are going to have a dust seal on here. And if I go to 7mm on the chart, it says that my torsion shim should be at 3 on the inside and 5 on the outside on the upper, and 3 on the inside and 5 on the outside on the lower. So that works out perfect. And if I had a different number here, I would just find that on the chart. So to set this up, what I'm going to do here is this is a brand new shim pack. I'm just going to wipe off the majority of the oil that's on here, just so we don't have any compatibility issues. Here I see I actually have a bent shim in this one, so I'm not going to use that. So we'll wipe this off and then we'll get things greased up. Okay, so I got my shims all wiped down. I didn't use any kind of cleaner or anything on there. I just wanted to get the majority of the original oil off. So now what we can do is we can start stacking these. So again, I'm putting 5 on the outside and then 3 on the inside. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my grease. You don't need a lot here, but I am going to grease in between each shim here. So that's 3, 4, and 5 for the outside. And now we can insert the pin into the knuckle itself. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a little bit of grease in this bushing. We will grease this at the end here, but we just want to make sure we get some in there to start. I also want to grease the face of this. I'll put a little bit more grease on the face of this here. And now I can insert the pin. We'll make sure our bushings go, or our shims go all the way in. And now we've got the first side done. Now we'll take our remaining 3. Again, a little bit of grease. A little bit extra on this first one. So there's 1, 2, and 3. And then to finish this off, there's a we've got this O-ring, which is going to slide on here, and then there's a little dust cap that's going to slide in like this. And now this upper one is all ready to go. So we'll just repeat that process for the lower one, and then we can get this slid on and into place. Okay, so with the all my bushings, or all my shims in place, now we can go ahead and get this installed. One thing to note on the dust, these little dust shields here, there's a little notch in there, a little tab that actually indexes in these slots in the control arm. So I'm just going to make sure I get those rotated back so they line up. And now we can get these slid into place. I'm going to pull this back just a little bit. Just to get my dust shield, make sure that that's lined up. So now we can just slide this up tight. There we go. Push our pins the rest of the way in. Alright, so those are fully seated and operating smoothly. So the way this works, once the pin is installed, you can see this little spiral groove that's in here. The bolt that pinches the trailing arm also locks this pin in place so it can't slide out. So what you want to do is just rotate this around until this groove lines up with the hole, so your bolt will slide in, just like that. So now we've got both of these lined up here. I've got new washers, and I'm using some lock nuts on here, some Nylock lock nuts. Just make sure nothing falls loose down the road. So we'll get our nuts on there. And now I'm just going to get this cinched up here. So there that is, snugged up just a little bit. And now what we want to do here is actually adjust. You can see how this is actually a little too tight right now. By rotating this link pin, I can control how tight this is. So if I do that, now you can see that this is loose. What we want to do is we want to tighten that up and take all the play out of it. So I'm just going to tap the knuckle back in, and I'm going to snug this up both top and bottom, just to the point where this gets a little too hard to move. And then what we're going to do is we're going to back this off just to the point where it's loose. And then we'll bring it up till it touches. Loosen that, bring it up till it touches. And now, with my dead blow, I'm just going to give this a tap. Top and bottom. And now, this is free to move, but there's no actual play in that. With it now set to that position, I can go ahead and tighten these up. So now we're actually pinching this control arm. And that's going to lock down on that nut to keep it, or on that link pin to keep it from moving. And just like with everything else, I am going to cinch this down according to my chart. We need to set this to 40 foot-pounds. There's one. And there's two. So now this side is all finished up. So what we'll do now is we'll just hop over to the other side and repeat the same steps. Okay, finally, last thing we're going to do here today is we're going to go ahead and get these knuckles greased up. And now when I'm pumping this up, I'm going to be watching for grease to come squirting out right down here. And there it is. So we got grease coming out of there. There we go. We got grease squirting out there. So with everything all greased up, I'm just gonna wipe up some of this excess, cap everything off, and then that'll be it. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. We got quite a bit accomplished. We got the beam installed, got the new suspension hung, everything's been torqued down and adjusted properly. So that's a good place to leave it for today. On the next episode, what we're going to do is we'll get the steering box installed, we'll get the steering wheel hooked up, make sure the steering's functioning properly, get it adjusted as much as we can. There's going to be a lot of little things we'll have to do once we get the car back on four wheels. And under its own weight. But again, I think that'll do it for now. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.